Well, good morning and welcome to Breakthrough Pathways. I want to share with you something today that I think is major consideration in the way in which we are dealing with developing leaders in our church. Now, I've suggested to you before that Breakthrough Pathways is fundamentally the program outside of the YouTube program is designed to start off at very low level of capacity or even interest and work with people in small groups of three, moving people in and out in what I call rotating triads and developing them so that they get up to what I call the sixth rung of the ladder. Now, today we're going to deal with the sixth, seventh, eighth rung of the ladder. Last night I watched a video of a man that I highly respect, and he was way up in the 14th rung of the ladder. And it was a room full of college students, and I thought, this is beyond where they are. They need something starting closer to the bottom. At the same time, those who are involved in church leadership, which is likely you, are the people who have to find those who are ready to move forward, become something more what it appears that they are at this point in time. We're going to talk about that because I think that we have a major difficulty. One of the big difficulties that we have statistically, and it doesn't matter the stats because it's different, is where I live. Roughly speaking, half of the teenagers that come up through our church drop out of church when they go off from home and start their own lives. I have a friend, a beautiful young Punjabi woman who is sick by her heritage and relationship, and she is very conscientious and religious. She says that she reads her, I know she badly, but she reads the equivalent of her Bible every morning and evening. Sometimes she fails, but every morning and evening, and gives it her peace and comfort for her life. I really respect the fact that she's trying to carry out. We're working with her. She's very attentive to the things of the gospel. We'll see whether she gets there or not, because we don't know yet. But we're well on our way to helping her understand what is going on in her life and also in the life of church. So today we're going to look at a very significant piece of church history that starts in the New Testament, written in this book. We're going to follow through all the chapters, 52, I think it is, chapters in this book, one at a time. We're on chapter 3 right now. If this is a classic published in the 1870s, and you get it, it's not in current print. You can get a used version like I did years ago. Now, what we're doing with that is trying to put it in today's context in a more meaningful way. So I'm putting together this document, which will be available in a colored PDF. Right now, it's 40 pages. We go through so far, four different chapters. And it's very simple to deal with because what we've done is we started with his book, chapter 1. I don't think you'll be able to see this, but it tells you what the reading time. How long is it going to take you for this summary? This summary was created by artificial intelligence, and I thought it was pretty good. And so I went back and I created a complete modern translation. It's not that it's a different language, but it's a different era, and therefore the verbiage is different. And I have a modern version of it that I've put in, so I got a summary version and a modern version. And then if you want to check me on the original and check to make sure that the AI did a good job and that me in reviewing it did a good job. And by the way, I'd love to have your feedback on that if these two. So all three of them. Now, typically, the chapter itself going to take you 15, 16 minutes, but the summary is only going to take you 4 minutes. And by all means, get through that summary and use it and make it useful. So today we're on the subject of Matthew and the call of Matthew. Matthew is interesting because Matthew is one of the two writers in the New Testament who give us the life of Jesus, and they were actually there, Matthew and John. Mark and Luke, Mark a friend of Peter, Luke coming later, a friend of Paul's. Matthew and John have really strong perspective because they were there. Now, it's interesting. Matthew is called in Mark and Luke, he's called Levi, but Matthew calls Matthew Matthew. He names himself. And in John's gospel, he just is the disciple who Jesus loved, and he doesn't name himself. Did John have Matthew's gospel in hand when he wrote his? Don't know. It was kind of nearly a generation later when he did. So perhaps he did, and perhaps he thought that maybe it would be better if I just leave. But who knows? But what we do know is when we deal with Matthew, we're dealing with someone who is really quite significant in the New Testament because he tells his own story. Now, he arranges things thematically, not chronologically. In the Eastern mindset that they were living in, the chronology didn't matter. The substance and how it's organized mattered. And we're going to do a little bit of that today. Just organize it in a way that's it's kind of useful. So we're moving to Capernaum. Jesus made Capernaum his base of operations after he moved from Nazareth. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about Capernaum. You can look this up. You can do two things. Once you can go Google an image of Testament, and you'll see Capernaum's up on the top of the Sea of Galilee. In New Testament times, it probably had a population of maybe as many as 1,500. It's called a city, but these towns were not all that big. Now, I want you to understand some things that are very different that we don't think about as different, but that really matter, that apply in our application of doing discipleship today and winning people to Jesus and leading them to follow him. This particular town that Jesus chose was on the highway. It was on the main hub. It's like in southern Ontario where we live. We live on the main way. The 401 goes all across southern Ontario. If you're somewhere else in the world, you can go look that one up. Going through Toronto, it's apparently the widest highway in North America. It's a significant road that has about a third, I think, Canada's population miles from that road. Now, Capernaum was a town kind of like that, except it wasn't Toronto. It was more like Milton, the town in which we're working right now, which is on the edge of Toronto. It was a hub for commerce, particularly the fishing business was strong there, and boat building and other farming and commerce things. It apparently was a bustling community in the time of the New Testament. So when you think about being there in the town of 1,500, where you've got no motorcycles, no cars, just carts drawn by animals at the most, you have no cell phones, no means of communication other than face-to-face communication or maybe face-to-crowd communication, which Jesus used it at some time. You've got no printed means other than handwritten stuff, and the New Testament writings were handwritten. So you're dealing in a society that deals with, in the positive sense, gossip. That is, what one person passes to another person to another person. And we've got Jesus in this town of Capernaum, and that's where his base of operations was. And so a lot of things are going on in Capernaum, and everybody knows everybody's business in a town like this. So one of the key centers in Capernaum is this, and this is the remains, they believe, of the synagogue, which was quite substantial. If you notice, kind of on the right, this pillar, and there's some people standing around, gives you a sense of how big it is with people. However, if you really take a look at that, you'll see that this is a church building. It's a synagogue that's probably typically no bigger than about 100 people can get in there. And Jesus spoke there on a regular basis. So it was a thing to do in Capernaum because that would be the listing post, where you'd go and you'd figure things out. But you've got a man who's watching from afar. He's probably not accepted in the synagogue because he is definitely at odds with the people because he collects taxes from Romans. Okay, so when Matthew gives an account of his ministry, he organizes things in a different way than we might organize things today And these chapters, you can see on this screen, uh, the main things that are happening. Interestingly, when Matthew talks about his own call, where Jesus comes to him and says, "Follow me," and he leaves the tax booth and follows Jesus. He writes this story into the story enveloped by a bunch of miracles. I think he sees his own conversion as a miracle, but not an isolated event in my estimation. I believe that he had seen Jesus do some of these miracles. He'd certainly heard about it because people who he would have a lot of contact with because they had to meet with him, his appointments all the time, we presume, and didn't like him, but he probably would pick up the vibes about who this new guy was. And so he's used to watching people from afar. You know, he's kind of like the tax policeman in town. So he's paying attention to who's getting in and who's not. And he knows the people who have done well and the people who are not doing so well. So I believe that when Matthew comes to Jesus, he already has been wondering about this, but not feeling like he'd ever belong. Not feeling like he could ever be accepted by someone who could do miracles. Not feeling that he could ever relate to somebody who can speak in the synagogue, even though he's probably quite rich. He's certainly not accepted in his society. So, with that in mind, let's look at all that background. And let's look at Matthew himself. He's a tax collector. He is subject to all kinds of societal prejudices piled up against one another. And that's true in every society. I'm told that from people from various ethnic groups, me being the born and raised kid in Canada, and I talk with people from different places. They say there's more prejudice amongst people who are more their kind than there is between white people and brown people, white people, yellow people. I haven't experienced that because I've not experienced that kind of prejudice against me as a white man. But you could be quite sure that there were a lot of societal pressures on Matthew, and he's certainly challenging all the norms that were there in the Jewish community. Now, there were more than Jews. There were a lot of Jews amongst the maybe 50. So that's the background of Matthew. You're going to pick your team. We've mentioned 5 others so far. You recall a couple of weeks ago, go back and watch it, that Jesus went in John 2:12. Jesus went on a retreat with his mother, his brothers, and his 5 disciples. We believe the 5 disciples at that point. He's developing a following of other people, so Bruce makes it quite clear that it's highly likely there were like 3 levels of understanding people. The clingers on, the maybe believers who kind of watched the show, and then there were the people who were actually trying to follow him. And eventually, we get to the place where he takes these people and chooses from them apostles, but that's for now. Okay, so there's a tremendous transformation in Matthew. He gives an immediate response when Jesus says, "Follow me." I can imagine, and have to imagine this, that Matthew's going home at night feeling rejected, probably not having a whole lot of friends other than fellow tax collectors, and thinking, boy, I would love to have a change. If only he would show some interest in what it would be like. I saw those fishermen guys from down the road, and I'd collected taxes from them, but there's something going on. I want a piece of that action. And so, first thing he does is throws a networking party. That's what he did. He gathers Jesus together with all of his friends, and he's there in Pharisees and the Levites, the religious people from the outside. They're thinking, hey, why is he eating with those sinners, those terrible people? Now, we have no evidence that Matthew was a cheater on the tax thing, but quite likely many others were. The Jews always believed that they were. So we've got Jesus and his disciples. Now, sidebar here is Jesus goes to the party, and he behaves as Jesus behaves. And other people watch him at that party. But of course, the outsiders didn't get it. And they say, what are you doing this for? Now, I think this is really useful because Bruce points this out in his book. Wait, I put his book, got to wave his book at you again. Doesn't pay for all of it. He says there's three arguments that he makes when people say, why would you choose such a field? One is the professional, the doctor. It's the sick people that need a doctor. Now just put a bookmark on it. And then he suggests that it's those who have been forgiven much, love much. And that's implying that Matthew's going to become, and the very best followers are the followers who came from the furthest distance. They were not the polite, upright living people. They were people who were disliked, demented in the society, rejected by all means. And then he also brings reference to this natural joy there is when somebody buys into what you bought into, whatever it is. If you buy a particular product and recommend it to another person and they buy that product, say, oh, wow, did what I said. But imagine when you've got the actual change of life, because we've got the story that's prior to this where John goes back home to his fishing village and his brother James is there. James wasn't down at the event where John the Baptist was. And John has no doubt told James all about it. And then Jesus comes along and says to them, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. And John says, me too, me too. And he jumps in on it. James jumps in on it. That must have been great joy for John to have experienced that joy in finding lost people. Now, the key issue here is that was then this. What are you and I going to do? I will confess to you that in 50 years this is just really emerging, drilling down deeper to me now than ever has before. And I believe with all my heart that if you look carefully into the life of Jesus, he is setting us an example that we should follow in his steps, as Peter says in one of his writings. And we have to see that Jesus took the opportunity. Yes, if you look at what Jesus is doing, living in Capernaum, he's speaking in the synagogue. Now, we don't know what he's talking about, but he doesn't get kicked out the first time. So he's there and he's taking it on his opportunities. He's calling his people. You see Jesus walking by the seashore. You know, that thing, there's water and there's a shore on the east side, seashore, whatever it is. And here he makes unexpected choices. He chooses fishermen. Come on, really? Couldn't you have found some upright Levite or priest who's already respected in the society? No, he didn't. He didn't do it. He took the ordinary people. Jesus didn't stand back and say, I sure hope they'll come. Let's pray that they will come to our church. No, he doesn't take that. He said, take the initiative, and he gets to that later on, and we'll get to that part in the course. He takes initiative to say to Matthew, follow me. You have throughout Matthew's gospel a frankness where he really beats up on the people for not responding, and an expectation that it might not work out. And this should be really critical for us to understand in following him today and leading the churches and the situations in which we find ourselves. Don't say, oh, I'm no good at that. I tried witnessing once and it didn't work out very well. I don't know how to talk to people. I'll certainly pass the lead on for the pastor so that he can do it or whatever. No. The expectations are, according to what Matthew records in his gospel, 3 out of 4 of the seeds don't really work out. Only one does. Works out magnificently, but 3 of 4 kinds of seeds fail. And that's what Jesus taught. And that's what we should understand, that most of what we do fails. So you know how you get more seeds to sprout? You don't look for better seed. You don't look for better soil. You spread more seed. That's what the thing is all about. Spread the seed. Give people the opportunity. Now, Jesus gave all kinds of opportunity to these people in Capernaum. And later on in his gospel, he says, "And you, Capernaum, you will be lifted to the heavens." You could think, no, no, you're going down to Hades. For if the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Sodom, it would have remained to this day. And I say to you that in our situations today, as we find our lives and our work, we've got to recruit more people to follow him. We've got to use I'm not trying to get rid of all the conventions, but they're not working that well. We've got to have a wider view. We've got to work not necessarily with down and out people, not necessarily not with down and out people, but with people who are unexpected. And how do you do that? Well, Yogi Berra, a famous baseball player of yesteryear, has some really crazy sayings. He just said these things. He wasn't trying to make a joke. He said, "A nickel ain't worth a dime anymore." You think we got inflation now? You got a nickel ain't worth a dime anymore. It makes sense, even though it makes no sense. And he said you can observe a lot by watching. And that's true. And I say from the sixth rung on the ladder in your situation, wherever it is, if you observe the other people, the teenagers who are, if you don't get involved in their life, likely to drop out, you get involved in their life. You know, one of the things that really makes a difference in the lives of young people, if you send them a box of cookies off at school, they will appreciate it. And they will say, "Hey, they actually did care for me back home." We've got this habit of putting teenagers and other children as well in silos. We send them off to their own area so we can get them out of our hair. You know, it's kind of like eating at the kiddie table and so on. Well, not all bad, but they don't understand that they are the ones that can follow Jesus and make a tremendous difference in the world. And you can learn a lot recruiting people, but who are you looking for? You're looking for fat people, faithful. Now, not necessarily faithful to Jesus, faithful to whatever they're committed to. You know, kids today are faithful to their video games. We had a young man live with us at one point in time when video gaming was starting to come on. He lived right here where I'm sitting in her house for about 6 months. And he, in some game of battleships, I never saw it, didn't care about it. He became the very best in the world at that game. And you buy tokens and you sink on the clips. And he took on the big guy with a bunch of little guys that he'd brought together. And he took down the big guy and became the biggest guy in the world. And as soon as he achieved it, what was that all about? I was giving my life to something that is absolutely meaningless. Now that he was the biggest guy in the world, everybody was just attacking him, and it made no sense to him long before. He just quit. But he was faithful at a stupid thing. Now, so you want to look for people who are already deeply engaged, not flittering, not scrolling from one thing to the next to the other, but that play on the team, that do their homework. They stay with things when they're given a task to do. They stay with it until it's done, even when nobody's watching. They're the ones who take the initiative to get out there and get jobs and do some things that maybe other people won't do. So you're looking for people who are faithful in that sense and hopefully become faithful. Jesus. These are the people down on the rung one of the ladder, and they got to be available to you. Now, if they say, "No, I'm too busy," well, then you got to move on and find somebody else. Don't force feed them. Always let them know that you're available. And you got to find somebody who doesn't know it. You know, that's so important. I've talked to so many young people in the ministry who know it all. Well, if they know it all, I can't help them. They'll eventually find out that they didn't know it all. And then that the next generation's coming up, they know it all. And they'll be laughing at them. And it's not a laughing thing. You're looking for people who are faithful, available, and teachable. But you got to watch. You got to look for them. And I'm challenging you today to find somebody in your field of view, in your church, in your neighborhood, who has those characteristics, who are like Matthew, collecting the taxes from day to day, doing the thing that nobody else wanted to do. He got rich at it probably, but doing the things that nobody else wanted to do. And if you go to that person, after observing them and thinking about them and build a relationship with them, they follow me as I follow Jesus. Maybe, just maybe, you'll make a difference. And it doesn't take a lot. You know, Jesus is, when he's building up his his leadership core here, you see he's only doing it slowly, one at a time, over a period of approximately a year. And we'll get to that when we put the whole 12 main apostles together next week. Now, would you please just pass this on? I think that's a simple thing to do. Copy the link, send an email to somebody and say, watch this thing. Maybe, just maybe, one of those things when you cast a wide net in Capernaum, your Capernaum, maybe you'll find somebody who wants to raise up and follow Jesus. Now, you don't know much in the New Testament about Andrew, but Andrew found Peter. We know a lot more about Peter. Maybe you're Andrew, and maybe you're going to find a Peter. But you got to do it. You got to try. Today's as good a day as ever to do it. So we'll see you next week. Bring a friend along. Have a discussion with somebody else on it. Smash that. Well, smash that subscribe button. Eventually, in due course, I'm going to get you some of this piece by piece so that you can read it over and ponder it yourself and meditate on it. But bring somebody else along with you.